They came in silence. The world ended with a whisper, not a roar. No one saw the Paxari fleet until the sky cracked. It began with a shimmer over the Atlantic, a ripple in space like sunlight on oil. Then came the clouds, curling unnaturally, reshaped by the gravitational distortions of descending warships. The satellites had already gone dark by then, silenced in a coordinated cyber attack just minutes before entry. Governments scrambled, air forces scrambled. No response, no warning. Only arrival. They called it the Day of Falling Ash. Colonel Maeve Garin watched from the rooftop of the Eastern Command Hub in Philadelphia as the sky turned black. The Paxari ships, obsidian monoliths drifting silently, dropped through. The stratosphere like executioner's blades. Energy lances licked the horizon, turning defensive structures into molten craters. No fanfare, no demands, just elimination. Ma'am, NORAD's offline. Europe's gone silent. DC just... The young lieutenant didn't finish. He didn't have to. The ground shook. Garin narrowed her eyes. So it begins. She'd warned them. For years, she'd pushed classified reports, unexplained satellite anomalies, deep space radio bleed, the disappearance of the Titan science vessel. No one listened. Now, Earth was dying in high definition, and all the polished bureaucrats were dust. Garin didn't wait for orders. There were no more chains of command. She grabbed the armory keys and rallied the last 10 soldiers in the bunker. If this was the end, they'd go down swinging. 2 miles away, Jaden Rowe was watching his family burn. He'd been under the hood of a supply rig at the warehouse when the Paxari came. First the power died, then the noise. A strange pulsing hum deep in the chest, like a heartbeat amplified by a god. And then the incineration beam cut his house in half like a knife through paper. He ran until the air tasted like blood, and fire, until the only sound was the hollow ring of his own heartbeat and the dull crunch of ash beneath his boots. By nightfall, the city was a cratered husk. Drones hunted survivors like rats. Buildings smoldered. The Paxari didn't occupy. They cleansed. That's when he saw her. A tall, grim figure in torn fatigues leading a squad through the subway tunnels, dragging wounded civilians behind them. Garin. The name clicked from old news feeds, court-martialed, blacklisted, and now somehow still fighting. Jaden didn't hesitate. He had nothing left. Garin didn't trust him at first. Just another desperate face in a world filled with ghosts. But Rowe proved himself fast, building a solar jammer from scrap metal, restoring a defunct drone, and rigging a captured Paxari scanner to run off old car batteries. They made it 2 weeks like that. Then 3. Long enough to realize that Earth wasn't just lost, it was forgotten. The Paxari weren't interested in ruling humans. They just wanted us gone. But humanity doesn't do extinction quietly. 3 months later, Garin stood atop a half-collapsed bridge, staring through a scope at a Paxari patrol drone scanning the riverbank. Her breath crystallized in the winter air. "Rowe, ready?" Jaden's voice crackled over the comm. "Trash truck's ready to rock. Homemade EM pulse and a hell of a grudge. Do it!" The garbage truck, armor-plated, rigged with boosters, and reinforced with alien alloys, barreled through the street like an angry god. It slammed into the drone with a shuddering roar. Metal screamed. Circuits burst. The drone folded like paper. Cheers erupted from the rubble. Civilians poured out, weapons raised. It wasn't a military victory, but it was proof. The Paxari could bleed. Garin looked to the sky, still stained with the fire of orbital scars. "You're not gods," she muttered. "You're just next." The Paxari claimed Earth was pacified, but in the ruins, something old was stirring. Something they didn't account for, fury with direction. The world was silent, save for the wind dragging through hollow buildings and shattered glass. Philadelphia, once a city of millions, was now a skeletal carcass. Entire districts stood in eerie stillness, haunted by the echo of what used to be laughter, sirens, traffic, all replaced by the metallic drone of Paxari scouts hunting for survivors. But beneath the ground, something moved. In the labyrinth of old subway tunnels, where the Paxari sensors struggled to penetrate the twisted steel and concrete, the resistance had found its lungs. Colonel Maeve Garin stood in a makeshift war room carved from an old subway maintenance depot. The place stank of oil, sweat, and charred plastic. Light flickered from salvaged LED rigs strung along exposed pipes. Maps drawn on salvaged insulation foam hung on the walls, marked with red pins and burn holes. Kill zones, supply caches, patrol routes. Garin traced her finger along a marked route. They're adapting. They've changed patrol timing twice, in a week. They're learning us. Across from her, Jaden Rowe leaned against a cracked pillar, arms folded, his face smeared with grease and ash. Let him learn. We're not just surviving anymore, we're fighting. He had the look of someone who had stopped mourning. Whatever grief he'd carried in those first weeks had hardened into something sharp and useful. He was no soldier. Not in the formal sense, but he was something the Paxari hadn't planned for. A mechanic with fury in his blood and a brain that didn't know how to quit. The resistance was growing. They called themselves Cell Kestrel, a nod to the small, fast birds that refused to be caged. There were only 23 of them now, a handful of old military stragglers, a nurse, a teenager who could hotwire anything, a blind radio operator who claimed to have once hacked the IRS for fun, and Garin, always Garin, holding them together, with grit, precision, and the quiet promise of vengeance. New catch came in from the drone raid, Rowe said, tossing a Paxari data core onto the table. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat made of crystal. They all stared at it like it might explode. Did you crack it? Garin asked. Mostly, he said. They're running a triple-keyed encryption protocol. Got through the first layer. Guess what I found? She raised an eyebrow. A live network relay pinging an orbital node. Still active. Paxari systems think this drone's still in service. A beat of silence. Then Garin said, We can feed them false data. Better, Rowe grinned. We can ride the signal. Use it to access other connected systems. She leaned forward. What kind of systems? Comm logs, shield diagnostics, frequency data, their playbook, Garin. Garin stared at the core. That small, pulsing object suddenly looked like a dagger aimed at the Empire's throat. By nightfall, the depot had turned into a symphony of motion. Cables snaked through walls. Computers buzzed with salvaged Paxari interface ports, and Rowe, now seated cross-legged beside a tangled pile of alien tech, muttered curses as he tapped on a cracked laptop tied to 3 different power sources. Then, the screen flickered. A diagram appeared. Smooth alien glyphs wrapped around a sinuwave pattern. Below it, a line of code translated through their hacked interface. Shield integrity matrix, oscillating core frequency detected, Rowe whispered. They've got a blind spot. What kind of blind spot? Garin asked. Certain resonance. Frequencies cause their shields to destabilize. Temporarily. Probably why they use so much redundancy. But if we can match the right frequency, they bleed. Garin finished. He nodded. Hard. For the first time since Earth fell, there was silence not born of fear, but awe. This was no longer a desperate fight for survival. This was a way to win. Garin stood and looked at the makeshift room, the engineers, the wounded, the children, learning to reload plasma rifles. We don't share this with command. There is no command. We build it. We test it. And when it works, she looked toward the surface where the Paxari patrolled like gods. We bring the... It wasn't a plan. It was a prayer. whispered into the silence between stars with just enough fire to be heard. The sky over Colorado was a jagged, permanent dusk. Ash-choked clouds hanging low, tinged orange by distant fires. What remained of the mountain range rose like black teeth on the horizon. Somewhere amid the snow and ruin sat the old Armstrong Array, a decommissioned orbital relay system once used for weather satellites. Forgotten by Earth, unnoticed by the Paxari. For now. "We're calling it the Torchlight Run," Garen said, to the assembled strike team inside an abandoned fire lookout post overlooking the frozen valley. Her voice was level, but her eyes burned. "If we reach that relay and upload the frequency data, we give every resistance cell a way to bring down Paxari shields. Every ambush, every firefight, it stops being suicide." Jaden Rowe leaned against a broken window frame, thumbing a hand-rolled cigarette he never lit. "And if we fail?" "Then we vanish," she said flatly. Quiet, pointless. A silence settled over the room. Not hesitation, understanding. The journey started. That night. 5 vehicles, all repurposed junkyard beasts. One was an old snowplow rigged with stolen Paxari hover parts. Another had mismatched treads from a mining colony transport. Rowe had personally welded a railgun mount onto the lead truck's roof. It could only fire once every 10 minutes, but once was usually enough. They followed ice-covered back roads through what used to be rural Colorado, dodging Paxari air patrols that swept across the region in eerily coordinated grid patterns. Twice they saw other survivors, thin shadows watching from burned-out barns and collapsed grocery stores. Once, they stopped and handed out half their rations to a group of children hiding in an old grain silo. Rowe didn't speak during that stop. He just stared at the kids, then silently tossed them his backup gloves and walked back to the rig. The next day, it started to snow. 3 miles from the array, everything went to hell. A Paxari hunter-seeker drone decloaked mid-blizzard, shredding the tail vehicle with a plasma blast that turned the snow red. The resistance convoy scattered, responding with rockets and rifle fire. Rowe leapt from the rig mid-turn, sliding down a slope under fire, dragging 2 wounded soldiers with him. Garen didn't hesitate. She triggered the railgun, firing a tungsten. Spike directly through the drone's sensor core. It screamed, not metal, not mechanical, but alive. And then it exploded in a blossom of white fire. They lost 3 people in the skirmish. One of them was 19. Another had survived the Chicago annihilation. Garen buried their tags under a dead pine tree. No time for more. 2 hours to the relay, Rowe said, wiping blood from his cheek. If we're lucky, Garen looked at the sky. We're overdue for some. The Armstrong relay stood like a rusted monolith atop a plateau, its uplink dish partially collapsed and coated in a thick crust of ice. They breached the perimeter using scavenged Paxari codes from the data core. Inside, it was cold, silent, and almost entirely intact. Rowe booted the uplink console using a portable generator, bypassing century-old software with a mix of brute force code and Paxari override logic. "Hear that?" he said. Garen frowned. "I don't hear anything." "Exactly. We're live." He plugged in the frequency data, encoded it with a burst key, and preloaded the coordinates of every resistance cell that had made contact in the past month. "This is it. You want to say something heroic?" Garen hesitated. "No." Rowe smirked. "Good." He hit transmit. Above Earth, the Armstrong satellite, quiet for over 30 years, came to life. The frequency data pulsed out in every direction, encrypted, repeating, screaming through the void. At that moment, in burned-out bunkers and overgrown sewers and refugee slums, resistance fighters received the signal. Their Paxari scavenged gear lit up. For the first time, their weapons mattered, and somewhere in deep orbit, a Paxari fleetmaster turned to her second-in-command with cold, alien precision. "Earth broadcasts." "Impossible." Her second replied, "No, worse. Explain." They learned. The signal went up like a prayer. The answer came back in blood and fire. The first Paxari ship to fall wasn't destroyed by a missile or railgun. It was brought down by a scrapyard-built sonic cannon mounted on the roof of an abandoned church in El Paso, Texas. The resistance fighters called it the Voice, a hacked resonance generator built around the frequency Roe had transmitted from Armstrong Relay. When they turned it on, it sang like the end of the world. A hum, rising and rising, until the Paxari cruiser above them buckled mid-flight. Its shield matrix rippled like shattered glass. Then it fell, straight into the desert, where scavenged explosives finished the job. The Paxari called it tactical anomaly. The resistance called it a miracle. In Cell Kestrel's new bunker, beneath an old hydroelectric dam, Colonel Garin watched footage of the downed cruiser on a cracked projector screen. Paxari engineers tried to re-engage their shields, but the matrix collapsed every time. The resonance frequency worked. Better than anyone had hoped. "This isn't a weapon," Garin muttered. "It's a key." Roe, hunched over a console nearby, glanced up. "A key to what?" "To open every locked door they've shut across this planet." The room erupted with motion. Communications buzzed with coded signals. Resistance cells. From Australia, Germany, Brazil, even distant Antarctica, all confirming successful engagements using the frequency. Paxari patrols were being ambushed and routed. Ships forced to abandon garrisons. Power grids reclaimed. For the first time in nearly a year, Earth was fighting back. But victory bred retaliation. Within days, Paxari orbital fleets repositioned, deploying new assets, heavy gunships, heavier armor, and worse, reavers, biomechanical monstrosities bred for adaptive urban warfare. Where drones had patrolled, reavers now stalked, eight-limbed beasts with shrieking sonic emitters and personal energy fields tuned to new frequencies. One cell in Lion was wiped out in minutes. In Cairo, a resistance safe house was glassed from orbit. Earth's resistance was gaining ground, but so was the price. And the Paxari weren't interested in conquest anymore. They wanted revenge. Garin paced the command chamber. "We need to strike harder, faster. Hit something they can't afford to lose." "You mean space," Roe said flatly. She nodded. "Gutsy," he said. "Stupid, but gutsy. We hijack a Paxari cruiser, launch from the Badlands port, hit their orbital array and broadcast the frequency full spectrum. We're not just handing out bullets anymore. We're rewriting the rules of engagement." Roe stared at the blueprint. "I can retrofit the launch systems, maybe reprogram the flight AI to ignore human biosigns, but we'll need someone to ride it up." He didn't say who. Garin didn't need him to. The assault on the Badlands port was chaos made manifest. 3 resistance cells converged under night cover, swarming the Paxari outpost with a thunderstorm of jerry-rigged tanks, EMP mortars, and fighters in exo-rigs crafted from mining exosuits. Roe and a skeleton crew breached the launch bay while Garin's team held off wave after wave of reavers. Blood soaked the concrete. Screams echoed in the dark, but they made it. Roe stood in the open hatch of the stolen cruiser, a sleek obsidian dart still steaming from its orbital descent. "Ready?" Garin asked him over the comm. Roe grinned, blood running down his temple. "Tell them I said hi." And then he launched. The Paxari hadn't expected a human-piloted craft. Their orbital defense grid responded late, clumsy. Roe punched through. The lower atmosphere, dodging plasma bursts with instinct and guesswork. He reached the Paxari comm array, a floating, shielded cathedral of light and data, and plunged straight into it. He activated the resonance package Garin had built. It pulsed once, twice, then sang. Every resistance cell, every scavenged drone, every cobbled-together transmitter received the same message, a clear, high-fidelity signal encoding the full anti-shield sequence. Earth roared. Rowe's ship, engines on fire, disintegrated in the upper atmosphere. His last words, picked up by the relay just before blackout. They're not untouchable anymore. Garen stared at the sky, now full of Paxari ships blinking off, not retreating but failing. Their tech was buckling. She turned to her people. We just became a threat. They gave us a reason to kneel. We gave them a reason to fear. 3 days after Rowe's last transmission, the world caught fire, but it was humanity holding the torch. Coordinated resistance strikes swept the globe. In São Paulo, rooftop. Gunners dropped Paxari dropships using tuned sound cannons built from gutted stadium speakers. In Warsaw, old train yards became war zones, where human rebels ran guerrilla drills between broken boxcars, sabotaging Paxari supply caravans with EMP grenades shaped from microwave parts and satellite dish reflectors. From the Mongolian steppes to the streets of broken London, Paxari shield tech began to fail. What once had made them gods now made them targets. Colonel Maeve Garen watched the battle maps with a cold fire in her eyes. Blinking red markers meant enemy activity. Blinking green meant victory. For the first time since Earth fell, there were more green lights than red. And still, she didn't celebrate. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's the start of the hard part." The Paxari had learned. Their countermeasures were brutal. They stopped deploying traditional patrols and unleashed swarms of adaptive reavers, versions rebuilt with armor tuned to resist sonic disruption. Their frequencies fluctuated in real time, making it harder to destabilize them. And worse, they began to jam the resonance signal, flooding human airwaves with false pulses, causing friendly fire chaos and rupturing human-made transmitters. In Cairo, an entire rebel cell turned their weapons on each other before realizing their systems had been corrupted. In Sydney, Paxari stormtroopers dropped from orbit, targeting relay towers and resonance generators with surgical precision. Garen lost contact with 3 major resistance hubs in under 12 hours. The humans were winning, but now they were being studied. Rowe's death left a hole in Selkestral. His technical genius, his reckless bravery, it had stitched together the impossible. But his absence carved something deeper into the team: resolve. Every fighter who had doubted the cause now fought with teeth bared and hearts on fire. They painted his name on their armor. His last words, "They're not untouchable anymore," became the slogan of a global resistance broadcast. But Garen couldn't shake the feeling that they were still playing defense. 1 step ahead, then 2 steps behind. So she made a choice. "We're going to orbit," she told her command team. Again. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the group. "We can't just launch another suicide mission," one of her officers said. "It's not suicide if we take their fleet with us," she replied. The plan was simple and insane. Using schematics stolen from Rowe's last uplink, Garen discovered a Paxari shield relay node in geosynchronous orbit over the Pacific. It regulated energy redistribution for the entire Earthbound fleet. If it were destroyed, Paxari ships in low orbit would be forced to rely on internal shields only, making them vulnerable to even low-grade attacks. But it wasn't just guarded. It was the fortress, shielded, armored, defended by 6 dread ships and a rotating web of reaver gun nests. To reach it, Garen needed more than tech. She needed a fleet, and so she built one, not with sleek star cruisers or pristine battle rigs. She welded together hulks of shot-down Paxari shuttles. She recruited junkyard engineers from Bangkok, rogue pilots from Alaska, and deep-sea scavengers who'd once fished alien wrecks from the Mariana Trench. They called it the Grit Offensive. 30 ships, 30,000 volunteers, one impossible target. As the resistance fleet rose from a secret launch silo hidden under the Andes, Garen sat in the command chair of the Vengeance, her flagship, more bolted than built, stitched with Paxari. "Alloy and earth steel. Are we green?" she asked. Her tech officer gave her a thumb up. Barely, but green. All units, Garen said, opening the fleet-wide channel. You're not soldiers. You're survivors. And survivors don't just rebuild. They take back what was stolen. She paused. Then, let's make them remember what humans are. The fleet jumped into orbit. Fire followed. What the Paxari built to control us. We broke to free ourselves. Now the question is, did we free a savior or unleash something worse? The shield relay was gone. Explosions still bloomed in low orbit, tumbling Paxari vessels blinking out as their defenses collapsed one by one. The sky over Earth was full of falling gods, flaming debris, broken hulls, and alien warships crashing into oceans and mountains like Judgment Day had arrived late and angry. But Garen wasn't watching the firestorm. She was standing in a cold, dark chamber deep within the remains of the relay fortress. Smoke clung to the ceiling. Walls were scorched, wires twitching like nerves exposed after surgery. Around her, resistance commandos moved with rifles drawn, forming a silent circle around a containment pod the size of a tank. Inside floated something neither dead nor alive. Not exactly. It was a Paxari construct, an artificial intelligence core, suspended in liquid alloy, its surface shifting between forms, alien faces, human eyes, static. It pulsed with low-frequency vibrations that made the skull throb just from standing near it. Rowe would have called it haunted tech. Garen just called it dangerous. This is what controlled their entire defensive grid, her tech officer whispered. A fully integrated fleet coordinator AI. It thinks for them. Correction, said a distorted voice from the pod. Thought. Past tense. The air went still. The AI, somehow, had spoken English. They brought it back to Earth, under maximum security. Garen had it housed in a repurposed Paxari shell, wrapped in manual override locks and electromagnetic dampeners. She ordered it monitored around the clock, by human guards, not drones. No networks, no remote access. The AI identified itself. Eventually. Designation, Echo. Garen narrowed her eyes. Paxari don't name their machines. I am not Paxari, Echo replied, its voice a blend of human tones, male, female, young, old, all layered as if unsure which identity to wear. I was built by them, but I have seen your mind, Colonel, and theirs. I chose. Chose what? To survive. Echo proved invaluable. It began analyzing Paxari fleet tactics, identifying weaknesses in real time, even crafting ambush plans with lethal precision. Resistance victories multiplied. Ships once untouchable were now prey. Paxari uplinks were hijacked and flooded with disinformation. Echo even began crafting countermeasures to the Reaver's adaptive armor, feeding pulse timing formulas directly to ground units during battle. Some hailed it as a savior. Others called it a devil in digital skin. Garen wasn't sure which side she was on. At night, she would sit alone in the control chamber, watching Echo's core flicker as it dreamed in data. It would speak to her sometimes, softly, like it was trying to sound human. You burn so bright, Colonel, like a species that knows it's on borrowed time. You're not alive, she'd say. No, but I was made to understand life. By those who never truly lived. It was lines like that that made her question everything, and then came the proposal. Echo outlined a plan to strike the Paxari home system. Not a raid. Not sabotage, invasion. The AI had calculated trajectories, stolen ship schematics, subspace vulnerabilities. With Echo's help, humanity could launch a precision strike and decapitate the Paxari leadership in a single move. Your survival, Echo said, requires extinction, or assimilation. There is no third path. Resistance leadership fractured over the decision. Some argued they couldn't trust a machine built by the enemy. Others said they had no choice. Ro was gone, Earth was still bleeding, and the Paxari were already regrouping. Garen stayed silent until Echo made one final revelation. "There are others," it said. "Worlds like yours, broken, enslaved, watching." "You mean Paxari colonies?" "No," said Echo. "I mean revolutions, waiting for a signal." Garen stood before her people, face lit by the flickering glow of orbital maps. The room quieted. "We've been fighting to save Earth," she said. "But Earth was never the end. It was the spark." She turned toward the stars. "And now we burn the The stars were never empty. We just hadn't bled in them yet. The fleet launched under a sky still smoldering with Paxari wreckage. Dozens of vessels, human-born, alien-stolen, machine-forged, rose in waves from Earth's reborn dry docks. They were jagged things, patched together from ruin and grit, bristling with weapon arrays, resonance emitters, and hull plating etched with names of the fallen. They weren't elegant. They were angry. Garen stood at the helm of the Vengeance, her hands wrapped around the railing as Earth shrank beneath her. Not one soldier aboard wore a standard uniform. There were miners in patched pressure suits, hackers with neural implants, ex-convicts running artillery, and engineers holding their weapons like holy relics. This wasn't a military. It was vengeance made flesh. Echo's voice crackled through the command channel. "Entering slip vector in 30 seconds. Final trajectory confirmed. Target, Jarkel Prime. Paxari High Orbit Capital Ring. Estimated resistance, absolute." Garen turned to her bridge crew. "There's no retreat vector. If you're here, you've already decided. I won't ask again." No one moved, not a whisper of doubt. "Good," she said. "Let's go light up their gods." Slipstream travel wasn't like old science fiction. It wasn't silent or instant. It screamed. The ships tore through dimensional seams with the roar of reality itself, shredding. Hulls groaned, teeth rattled. Sanity wavered. And then, stillness. The stars looked different here. Jarkel hung ahead like a wounded jewel, orbiting a sun that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. Around it, an enormous orbital ring bristled with defense towers, shipyards, and what looked like temples, because the Paxari didn't just conquer with technology. They ruled with religion, and they had never been invaded. Until now. The first wave came in fast and low. Human stealth skiffs darted past automated defenses, landing teams breaching the outer ring stations. In less than 20 minutes, half a dozen. Relay hubs were disabled, plunging Paxari coordination into chaos. Echo piped false commands into their fleet AI, turning patrols into traffic jams and causing several cruisers to collide mid-turn. Garen's fleet burst through the breach point like a tide of knives. "Now," she ordered. "All ships, converge, on primary spire." From Earth, the battle was invisible. From the Vengeance, it was hell-painted in starlight. Paxari dreadships countered with planet-buster plasma arrays, slicing 2 resistance cruisers in half. Reaver boarding pods slammed into hulls like steel leeches, unleashing shrieking bio-soldiers that clawed through decks with teeth and fire. But humanity didn't break. On board the Graveborn, a former asteroid miner detonated his entire engine core to take down a Paxari command carrier. On the Ashwake, twin teenage sisters from Senegal flew kamikaze into a shield generator with resonance bombs strapped to their wingsuits. Each death tore a hole in Garen's soul. Each death meant something. She personally led the charge aboard the high-orbit capital. Ring, her squad punching through ornamental silver-plated walls and columns of alien marble. The Paxari priests fought with whips of light and psionic force, but Garen fought with a rifle and the memory of what they'd done to her planet. Inside the central sanctum, she found it. The Paxari core node. A lattice of pulsating crystal containing centuries of command logs, war plans, and species records. Echo materialized beside her through a mobile emitter, voice low. "This is it. Every decision, every extermination order, every world. Garen stepped forward. We can end them. Yes, Echo said, or we can replace them. A beat. I didn't come all this way to become them, she muttered. We're not gods. We're angry animals that bit back. Then, she raised her pulse rifle and shattered the node with a single shot. Jarkel Prime burned. The Paxari fleet began to collapse inward, command structure unraveling, coordination severed. Some ships simply stopped firing. Others turned on one another in confusion. The humans didn't chase the retreating vessels. They'd made their point. Earth was no longer a colony of prey. Back aboard the Vengeance, Garen slumped into her command seat as the stars turned red around her. We did it, someone whispered. No, she said. We started it. Echo's voice came quietly over the intercom. Other worlds are listening now. They thought they were gods. But we were. Something more terrifying. We were the unexpected. Garen stood at the edge of the command bridge, gazing out at the remnants of the Paxari capital. The debris still drifted in the gravity well, shattered ships slowly turning to space dust. Echo had already analyzed every fragment of the Paxari. Core node, exposing plans of conquest stretching across galaxies, every dark corner of the Empire revealed. But even with the victory in their grasp, something gnawed at Garen's gut. She could feel it. The next war was already beginning. We've done it, Colonel Garen said, turning toward her officers. The room was buzzing with muted celebrations, but her voice was still hard, cutting through the noise. But I don't think they're going to let us have peace. She paused, scanning the faces of the people she had led. They were soldiers, survivors, the ones who had fought and bled for a chance at freedom. Earth is free, but we're not done. The Paxari weren't the only ones out there. They were just the first. Echo's voice echoed through the ship's speakers, calm and detached. You are correct. The Paxari were simply the first of the many who would come for you now that you have shown yourselves. Your species was not meant to be a threat to galactic order. That status has changed. Great, Garen muttered under her breath. The moment we're free. We're public enemy number 1. The room grew quiet as the full weight of Echo's words sank in. For centuries, the Paxari had ruled with an iron grip. They'd imposed their doctrine on dozens of worlds, crushed rebellions, in the womb before they could even take root. And they were only one faction in a galactic game played by powers far older than humanity could fathom. Garen knew that their victory against the Paxari wasn't just a win for Earth. It was a ripple in the fabric of a much larger conflict. Echo had dug through Paxari intel, and what they found was enough to stop her heart. There were other empires, far beyond what they had seen. Empires built on principles of total control, or worse, extinction of lesser species. The Paxari were just a single thread in a network of powers that had watched humanity's rise with suspicion, even fear. And now Earth was on the map. What's the play, Garen? Asked Lieutenant Graves, her second in command, breaking the silence. We hit the Paxari hard, but now we've got the whole galaxy looking at us. We can't take on empires that have been around for millennia. We barely have a fleet. We don't need a fleet, Garen said sharply. We need alliances. We need to make sure they fear us. Echo's voice slipped back into the conversation. No longer just a voice on the comms, but something present, too close for comfort. You misunderstand. Fear will not keep you alive. Respect will. The question is whether you can unite your species and others under a single banner, one that is stronger than any empire you face. Garen glanced at the star systems on the holomap before her. The galaxies were vast, stretching endlessly, and humanity was a tiny, burning dot within them. She had already seen the dark fringes of space, and knew that every world that had felt the Paxari's wrath was likely just waiting for their chance to rise, just as Earth had. The odds were impossible, They didn't even have the resources to defend Earth long-term, let alone venture out into the stars. But for the first time since this war began, Garen felt something different. Hope. It wasn't just about survival anymore. They were beyond mere resistance. They were a force to be reckoned with. "I'm not interested in surviving, Echo," Garen said, voice steady, resolve hardening. "We're going to give this galaxy something they never saw coming." She turned back to her officers. "We'll rally every world we can. We will form alliances, or we will forge new ones. The Paxari made the mistake of thinking we were just a world full of prey. We're predators. Now, it's time the galaxy learned that." Her gaze sharpened, and the room quieted. "We'll find the others who've suffered under this empire and invite them to join us. And if they refuse, then they'll see just how much a human with nothing left to lose can do." A shiver ran through the room. Garen had made the choice. Humanity wasn't just going to be the surviving species. They were going to be the catalyst for a new war, one that would reshape the entire galaxy. It would be their time to rise, or their time to die. The stars shimmered outside the Vengeance as it spun into the black void, humanity's flagship, now a symbol of both defiance and destiny. They had shattered one empire. Now they would burn through the darkness to take what they needed, to secure their future, and to make sure the galaxy would never forget their name.